Welcome to U Counsel. In our previous lecture, we talked about some of the avenues of resolving family law disputes. In today's lecture, we'll talk about the applicable legislation. If you have a family law dispute and you need to go to court, what are some of the different legislations that may apply to your scenario? We begin with our usual disclaimer that this lecture is not legal advice, so if you have any specific questions regarding your issues, you should contact a lawyer or a paralegal or the Law Society of Ontario for a referral. What are the legislation that impact family law in Ontario? There are 4 pieces of legislation. One is called Family Law Act. Second is Divorce Act. Third is Children's Law Reform Act. And the fourth one is Child, Youth, and Family Services Act 2017. Family Law Act is a provincial legislation. And what does it cover? It covers the division of family property. It covers the issues relating to matrimonial home. It deals with support obligations regarding child and spouse support, both. It deals with domestic contracts, and then it deals with dependents' claims for damages. So I have provided the link here, and I will also post it under in the YouTube posting. I'll post these links so you can access this. But this is what the Family Law Act looks like. It says RSO 1990. This is RSO means Revised Statute of Ontario. So when there is an O, that indicates that it's an Ontario statute. If it said RSC, that means Revised Statute of Canada. So this is a provincial legislation. And you will see here that it has different parts. One part deals with family property, then matrimonial home, support obligations, domestic contracts. So domestic contracts is dealt with here because it deals with all kinds of domestic contracts: marriage contract, cohabitation agreement, separation agreement. And what it does is this legislation provides certain clauses that deal with those marriage contracts. So for example, in marriage contracts, parties can enter into a marriage agreement, but when if a marriage contracts deal with the matrimonial home or its disposition, then that clause is unenforceable in a marriage contract pursuant to this legislation. So it's important to understand that what is the framework of domestic contracts that is permissible for parties to enter. Then there is dependents' claim for damages, and what this section or this part, what it allows is it allows the dependents of certain people to claim damages. So for example, if a person was injured because of the negligence of another person or died because of the negligence of another person, then the person who's injured or the person who died, his or her spouse, children, parents, grandparents, or siblings may have certain right to claim damages against the person who was negligent and who caused the injury or death. So this is the part of Family Law Act which allows that kind of a claim to be made in a personal injury, in a negligence claim. Now, it is important to note that the Family Law Act does not deal with custody and access issues. So it does not deal with custody and access, and it does not deal with divorce. So it is dealing with division of family property, matrimonial home, support obligations, but no information, no guidance, no legislation on custody and access in the Family Law Act. So now we'll figure out where do we find legislation with respect to custody and access. So the second legislation I want to talk about is Divorce Act. Divorce Act is a federal statute, and it deals with divorce. Couples who are married, legally married, they can obtain divorce under the Divorce Act. A common law couple does not need to seek any divorce. They do not need to seek any court order for their separation with respect to the separation itself. Now, because the Divorce Act deals with married couples, it does provide for child and support obligations, but this is only for married couples. So remember, I showed you in Family Law Act that people can seek child and spousal support. So Family Law Act would apply to either married or common law couples, but Divorce Act only applies to people who are married. So under this act, only married people can seek child and spousal support. Similarly, this act, Divorce Act, provides for custody and access, and again, it only applies to married couple. So Family Law Act that deals with either married or common law couples. It deals with their spousal support and child support obligations. Family Law Act does not deal with custody and access. And Divorce Act deals with only for married couple. So the third legislation that comes into discussion is Children's Law Reform Act. And again, this is a provincial statute. And this statute deals with custody and access issues for all parents. I'm going to quickly show you the Divorce Act. Again, this is RSC, Revised Statute of Canada. And it deals with divorce. And under the corollary relief section, it deals with child and support orders, spousal support orders, and then custody orders. So these are for people who are married. And then with respect to Children's Law Reform Act, again, which is an Ontario statute, it deals with custody, access, and guardianship, and provides for the custody and access orders. So custody and access for all parents can be dealt with by Children's Law Reform Act. And there's a section about parentage. It explains, it actually indicates what is a parent under law. There are also issues of guardianship of a child's property. If child owns certain property, then who is to be the guardian of that property? That is also dealt with under this legislation. And then if a child's property needs to be disposed, then what are the laws with respect to that is dealt in the statute. The final legislation that I want to talk about today is called Child, Youth, and Family Services Act 2017, which is right here. Again, it's an Ontario statute of Ontario, SO, it's an Ontario statute. And essentially, this provincial statute deals with the right of children and youth. It specifies what are their rights and deals with child protection matters. So children aid society, foster parenting, all of these are sort of covered under this particular legislation. But what is also important to know is that all adoption matters are also dealt with under this specific legislation. So these are the four legislation that you may be dealing with respect to a family law dispute, depending upon your circumstances. So it is important for you to understand which specific legislation applies to your circumstances. So in our previous lecture, we discussed which specific court would have jurisdiction to deal with your matter, because if you go to the wrong court, you will not be able to get the relief that you are seeking because the court does not have jurisdiction. Similarly, when you're asking for a legal relief, you need to know which specific legislation applies to your case in the specific circumstances of your case. And there is some overlap between these legislation. There is, and then the legislations are not, it's not one legislation that deals with it. Ideally, everyone would have preferred that there was one-stop shop, one legislation that could have dealt with all family law matters. But there are reasons for having these different legislations. Federal government has certain jurisdiction to deal with marriages and divorce. Provincial government has certain jurisdiction. So all of that comes into play. And then each of these legislation have different functions, and their basis for creation is slightly different from each other. So that's why there is overlap, and you need to understand all of that. And also it is important to understand the contents of these legislations, so you know in specific circumstances of your case, how would this legislation apply. Hopefully that gives you an understanding of the legislation in Ontario. This is only for Ontario. Just to keep in mind that if you're dealing with these matters in another province, then the Divorce Act will apply to all provinces and territories of Canada, but Family Law Act would differ from province to another province, and to make sure that you review those legislations as well. Thank you for watching.